And welcome back to another episode of Psychic Evolution. I'm Jamie Clark.
And I'm Maggie Clark, and this is the podcast where you discover the psychic potential within to empower yourself and manifest your psychic and mediumship gifts.
And these abilities are so natural, they're supernatural.
And welcome back to Season 8 of the Psychic Evolution podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening today. We appreciate you, and we are so honored to be kicking off Season 8 today with a really fun episode of what happens when we cross over.
And in that aspect, so many of us do realize and feel that when our loved ones cross over to the other side, that it's a whole different energy, that possibly there may not be any form, it's all consciousness and whatever the case is. And I can only speak for myself, but I always say with the mediumship that I never, ever talk to the dead. There are none. To me, as we perceive death, is you die in this dimension and then you go to the other side after this. And as I always say, one, everything's spiritual. Two, life is relative because we as humans are extraterrestrials to everyone else. And I always share the fact that aren't we right now living on the other side of where we come from before here? Doesn't that mean we must have died? What if just pulling out of one dimension gets you born into another one? And in this case, for the human concept, it's coming in as a baby and then you learn and all that. What if you take the awareness of what you've learned in this experience into just the next level? And you don't necessarily have to be born a little baby again. You find yourself with your own identity right here, right now. And to me, because I'm always connecting, but each dimension has its own vibratory rate. Each dimension feels just as solid as this one. And I always show the fact like, oh yeah, nothing's solid. It's all vibration, light, energy, frequencies, and all that kind of good stuff. So when you're realizing that it's just on the other side, like we just went over the fence, still a physical reality, but in a different capacity. And for me, I never, ever have lost my own identity when I've made connections or gone to the other side as we perceive it. I stay connected to who I am as a soulprint of consciousness, and I realize the unification that everything is one. And it's that kind of a connection that allows me more comfort, more solid connection, and trust that if we can make these connections, one, realize maybe there is something to what we're saying. Two, question everything and make your own connections. When you're willing to do the homework and those experiences and you have that firsthand experience, now it's real. I always share the fact to go, that firsthand, solid. Secondhand's lovely. But firsthand is like, well, I don't understand it, but I just experienced it. It becomes a catalyst of consciousness. You may not understand it, but you just experienced it to open up to possibly a different channel that's playing, a different way of seeing things.
So we've gotten quite a few questions around what happens when we cross over. One of those is, do we just turn into like an orb of light or just a pure energetic state? Can we be in our physical bodies? Will we experience physical experience such as walking in the woods or driving a car or whatever it is that you want to do? So all of these questions have come up. So today we just want to break the myth that it's all possible. When you cross over, sometimes you might assume a physical body and sometimes you might not. When you are not incarnated within a physical body and have committed to quote unquote like a lifetime on earth in this reality.
What if you realize you're pure consciousness? That if you want to have a body, you certainly can. But bringing up, what about all of the other lifetimes? All of the other vehicles that you've been in that more than likely don't look identical to this lifetime's one. And when you can realize that it doesn't matter where you are, you're never lost and always found. Now, for that connection, it's very powerful because there are times where I've heard of a person's near-death experience, an NDE, and there's times where the person has graduated life because of a circumstance, and just as they're getting ready to kind of hunker down and enjoy the next level, in this case heaven or whatever you want to see it as, they'll have a loved one going, "Bip, not your time yet," and they find themselves back here in this physical dimension. My thing is, isn't that kind of interesting? But in this case, most of the time, it is a loved one that you're aware of, whether it's a father, a mother, grandpa, grandma, whoever it might be. But there's that type that you don't fight it. But I always question, go, well, don't you find that interesting if another loved one has your own time frame of attainment, meaning when you're supposed to check out and when you're not? Because you're not made to, you're allowed to. And when we can realize that it's just the next level, just the next life experience, because as eternal beings, we've always been, ever, ever, ever. And that's why I love to share the fact with the scientific aspect that we're starting to validate more of the ancient, esoteric, we're eternal, and all those kind of things. And if we can put more scientific methodology to the spiritual stuff and unify it with more practicality, might be a little bit easier to go, well, okay, so what else is there? What else is happening? That's why I always say, please question everything, but be open. Have your experiences, and when you have those firsthand experiences, it will now become very real.
So I do believe it's possible to have a physical experience on the other side. I also think it's possible that you could, float in the cosmos and be pure energy and go frolic at different planets or whatever it is that you choose to do. So again, this is all depending on your soul's evolution, your soul's growth. And when you cross over, you're just in a different phase. And we have to remember, even here in the physical, even here on Earth, we have a body, we have a vehicle, we have homes and structures and things that we call physical, like this chair and table, this computer, this microphone. These are all physical items, but in reality, they are just pure energy state. So what is the difference if this can unmanifest from its physical form and return to pure energy? So think of life as cycles of manifesting and unmanifesting, from the invisible world to the visible world, from the visible world to the invisible world. There's a cycle of life that happens. And this is the cycle of, you could call it life and death, or manifestation and unmanifestation, the visible, invisible. When we are on this planet, we have a connection to the physical. We think it's solid. We think it's unmovable, unchangeable, because it has a form. But remember that this is just a pure energetic state. And if it were to dissolve its form and return to pure energy, maybe it could manifest as something else. So when you think of that in context of just energy being able to transform itself, when we do leave our physical bodies, we transform, we die, we transform to the other side. And then what are we going to manifest from there? And sometimes it's not as solid as this reality. I mean, we're not as locked in to a certain type of frequency, because when we choose to have an incarnation, we do get locked in until we graduate, or until we learn how to unmanifest the manifest, or become invisible, or walk through walls, or whatever it is that we choose to do, maybe even shape shift. All of these are things that people have witnessed, people experience, and in some cultures, this was a practice. And so this is the experience of working with energy, to know that it can be transformative even here. But we're also growing up with a belief system and a mindset that says that's not possible. So what we believe sometimes also plays into what we feel is our own reality. Now, if we're taught that this is solid and unchangeable, and a desk is always going to be a desk, that's it. It can't unmanifest and remanifest as something else. And if I believe that, then I'm going to get stuck in a much tighter physical reality. So when we're on the other side, we know that we are beyond the belief system of this culture, this incarnation, this time frame on Earth, because all time's happening now. So when we cross over, we are not limited by the belief system that we have in our brains right here, right now. So again, remember, what you believe is part of your reality. If you believe that you can transform from a manifested state to an unmanifested state, then it's possible. And we see this a lot with energetic healing, where people are curing tumors overnight. They're like the size of a golf ball, and then all of a sudden they're gone, or half the size. And this could be documented, because things can unmanifest. So we love this with energy healing, because if we have a project that's quote unquote forever and ever, and there's nothing you can do about it, do we actually believe that? Because what we believe will then create some of the reality of whether we can transform, transmute, and shift that energy pattern to a different state.
And speaking of shifting that energy pattern to a different state, there was a time, and it's called an apport, where I was home alone and I was at the kitchen table. And I always say I'm lazy. I don't carry change. I only carry bills. And so I was doing what I was doing at the table, and I had to go out of the room into another room to get something. And when I came back, at the table that I was just at was a dime. I'm like, I'm the only one here, and I didn't set it there. And so, again, they call it an apport, from one dimension into another. Just as physical as this one as we perceive it, but it's also what they call psychometry, the ability to grasp an object or grasp an object with your mental thought patterns and read the energy. I picked that dime up in this case, and I started reading the energy. It was fascinating because I started going interdimensional. It is amazing. To me, anything that you touch holds a vibratory rate of your energy in connection with that. So anyone who's going to do psychometry can grasp an object and read the energy of whoever might have touched that or has been connected to it. And then you get into the point where we are in that eternal life. We will never, ever die. As the quantum physics, that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed, which is exactly what Mag is referring to in the shifting of that energy pattern. And when you are able to start enjoying those connections, because I don't necessarily physically go to these other dimensions when I'm making the connections, I connect with whoever that person is, that Soulprint, and they give me the reflection of consciousness of what that reality is for them. But not only that, in that reality, they're able to give me, our loved ones on the other side as we perceive it, are able to give me a lot of validations about this particular physical life experience and how that person was connected to the loved one still here. And when you can be very accurate with that, the best that we can, of course, and it moves from really good guesswork to, oh, maybe there's something to that, then we create the bridge of connection. Then we're able to go, hey, if this is enough validation to go, all I'm doing is listening, that's it, they're talking with you just like me. And when you can be that solid with the information to go, there's no way you could know that. I'm like, I know, except we know it, and here's what we're doing. And when you can bring those kinds of validations, those solid, as we perceive it, validations from one dimension, their loved one on the other side as we perceive it, into this dimension, because we're sitting here physically tapping in, and it now becomes a unification, a blending of dimensions. And then the more you do that, the more your molecular structure of the human body vibes with those interdimensional frequencies, tuning in. So you're able to start tuning in more. And when our loved ones who are able to read energy, because it's all energy to me, and everyone can read it, do you want to, what level do you want to take it to? Within that connection of our loved ones are also able to see a lot of upcoming potential events for us that are still here, some of that psychic stuff. And when we can start to become a little bit more comfortable and realize that, again, we have that forgettery at the moment so that we don't remember where we come from or where we're going. It gives us the gift of living in the present of where we are. And the more that we can encompass and appreciate the moments, the more that we can saunter through the ethers and make other connections with not only our loved ones, but sometimes with other me's, with another dimensional me. There are multiple realities. All things are existing at once.
So when we familiarize ourselves with someone's soul print, this happens a lot when we have bonded experiences here on earth and we get to really know the quality of energy of someone's soul. Now, when you cross over, you're also returning to an energy state of your whole entire life, your eternal soul, your oversoul, which has many different expressions. Like Jamie said, in mediumship, a lot of times, even as an oversoul, they're going to come back or come through as the people that you knew them to be here. But that's not always the case. I mean, they could return to this eternal state of just like flying in the ethers as a fairy or whatever it might look like, but the soul print will be the same. So the oversoul, the soul print, the part of you that is eternal, that keeps going, the energy that never dies, that always is, that, because Jamie always says we are eternal beings, that can shift and change form. Sometimes it might take on a form of, say, a past life, like when you have a memory of a past life, or you meet another version of yourself standing in the kitchen as Jamie did years ago. You can literally have different types of expressions, and you can do that even on the other side. But definitely our loved ones want us to be comfortable, which is why they come back as we remember them. So a lot of times they will come back with characteristics of when you knew them. If it was your grandpa, maybe he's going to look old or he won't look younger because you didn't know him when he was younger. So he might come back a little bit older so that there's a recognition. So again, that doesn't mean that on the other side he looks like he's old grandpa. He might come through like in his prime of like 20s, 30s, that might be his individual expression or a form that he might take on the other side. He might actually be like, you know what? I don't even need a body. I just don't need it right now. I'd like to not have one. And does that mean that they can be around us without taking physical form? Yeah. And that's when we feel them. We feel their presence around going, oh, I know my grandpa's around. Oh, I know that feeling of who that soul print is. Whether I see it, whether I have a medium tell me that he's standing there or not, when you recognize the soul print, that's when you know you're connected. So again, on the other side, what happens when you cross over? That depends on you individually and what it is that you would like to do. Sometimes you will stay close to the people here as a guide. Sometimes you'll go on and explore other parts of the universes. It depends. It depends on who you are, what part of life you want to experience, and where you need to be. Just remember that we have a very limited understanding of all time happening now in a society and a conditioned way of believing that there's linear time. So we really don't get it. We don't perceive the multidimensionality of who we are. So whether we can perceive that here or we have to wait to cross over to really understand that, we are very interdimensional, multidimensional beings with an eternal soul print that takes on many different forms for many different lifetimes in many different planets and many different universes.
All experiences are happening now, all lifetimes, all that good stuff. I call it soul tracing because we're eternal beings, but a lot of people will call it, because they're on this planet, past life regressions. And I share the fact that in this particular life, right now, as I'm perceiving it, I have been terrified of heights my whole life. And I'm like, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. I've never fallen off of anything. Why would I even feel that way? And I've always had it so that if it was a mountain area and it's like a slanted like that, I'm fine. But if it's a drop off, I am freaked out. My body starts going and just craziness. And so I decided to do a soul tracing. Because I asked Chi, my master guide, I'm like, Chi, what the flagnog? What's going on? Why am I so fearful of something that I don't believe I've experienced in this lifetime? Why is it so strong for me? He's like, well, let's do some soul tracing. And so for me, I imagined myself on a beautiful billowy cloud floating effortlessly over a landscape, feeling the warmth of the sun and the cool breeze. And in this particular connection, I began to descend through the cloud, and as I'm coming down, I find myself on this big 40-story building, and apparently it was back in New York area. And in this particular lifetime, I was known as a beam walker. And so we would, have the outlines in the middle, bars and all that kind of stuff. Well, I was walking down one of the beams, and I didn't see that there was some large bolt that was just right there. And I stepped on it, and wow, I fell 40 stories. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that makes sense. Why I would feel that is, one, consciously in this life, I wasn't aware of that. Two, as an eternal being, that had been in my life experience, and in this case, a different time frame and a different life as we perceive it with a different body. Because, again, all of these experiences are happening at the moment. You can tap in, because when I tapped into the other lifetime in the early 1930s, it was happening now. It was like I'm stepping on this bolt and going over. So to me, there is only the eternal now. There is no linear time, because they'll share that and I'll be like, really? Daylight savings time? Really? You can shift it? Because if that's possible, then that's doing time travel, isn't it? Isn't that what? Right. So again, just my perspective. But it's that type of connection that everything is happening now. You can tune in, if you choose to, other lifetimes for other insights and other empowerments. Because for me, it didn't change everything when I connected with that particular lifetime as a beam walker. But it did bring to the point to go, now I understand that even though it's not this life, as an eternal being, that's like, I don't know, experiencing a few minutes ago kind of thing. But it's still part of who I am. So you either learn to blend those realities as that eternal being and give yourself the gift of living in the present, which is kind of what the universe does for us. You don't remember where you come from, where you're going, but hopefully you connect with where you are. And that connection is, we are always eternal. We are always growth-seeking beings. And when we realize that, yeah, you're here and this is a physical dimension, but when you graduate life, it is just as solid as we perceive it for any dimension. Like, there are trees. People say it was in an open field, or whatever the case is, but it was real. It was solid. They weren't like, my hand just went through everything. It's, in this case, and in another lifetime, I was walking around doing this stuff. What if some of that past life experience is just the residue of your eternal soul print of consciousness? That particular experience for that particular moment in our eternal oneness.
It's pretty fascinating when you think about it, because gosh, there's so much limitation that we have in our minds just from this culture. We have to unravel that. And I think that's the first place that we can go, is really looking at, what do I believe? What have I been told? Is it true? Is it not true? And as scientists are proving that all time is happening now and we live in a quantum field, it is breaking down some realities. And yet we're still clocking in, clocking out, looking at the time, going, what time is it? So we still have this reality that we have to sift through and process through. But remember that all these realities are playing all the time. And so we can tap into different states, different dimensions, different belief systems, even though we are conditioned in this belief system. It doesn't mean that we are limited to it. So keep that in mind and see what you really believe, and then reiterate it.
I share the fact that, I soul trace in those experiences of other lifetimes. However, those are physical experiences, but there are many times where I'm unifying with the oneness. I become everything. There is no separation with anything. It is truly all interconnected. And it's not like, I don't know who I am. It's like, what I keep hearing is, I am, I am, I am. And it's not like I have no identity. I'm experiencing this and feeling it. And that's why I share, unless you graduate life, pass, die as we perceive it, or you tune in to the universal oneness, it's like the best mood you've ever been in, the best meal you have ever had. Truly, my soul feels full. And I'm like, holy crap, most of us running empty, and when's it over kind of thing. And every time I unify with the oneness and come back into this physical body, the words that come with it are, who are you now?
I had an interesting experience. I had a friend crossover, and it had been 8 years, and I didn't really feel her, make really great connections with her through mediumship. And I didn't doubt that we were connected, and I wasn't worried about her, and I just didn't really make the connection. And it wasn't until 8 years after she passed. And when I did connect with her, she did not look like anything that she looked like when she was here. She literally had like these golden flowy robes. She was more of a light body. She had wings. Just this golden white light around her. You asked me, did it look like her when she was here? No, but the exact same soul print.
Feels the same.
Yes, it felt exactly the same. And so realize that that was the form that she had assumed on the other side. And I was just open to see her in a different way. So a lot of times these connections, we're wanting our loved ones to be a specific way when they come to us, and their soul print will come to us. And many times they will come looking exactly like they looked here. But oftentimes I find that they are coming as to who they really express themselves to be in that eternal place.
And you never lose your personality flavor as a soul print. That's why it's like, no matter what body, it's why I was asking Mag, with this person, different looking, yet you felt the familiarity of their soul to go, oh, they're different from what they were in this particular lifetime. Well, because they're allowing themselves to flow free with that kind of energy. And with that dynamic, our loved ones want to help us if they can. And they want to bring us comfort if they're able to. And it's kind of interesting, but Mag and her connection, as she was sharing, it was 8 years. 8's kind of a symbolic number to me. That metaphysical, the top zero, integrating with the bottom physical aspect of the bottom zero. And then if you take that 8 and put it on its side, it's infinity. It's all very symbolic as well. And when you can saunter through the ethers, so to speak, other dimensions, and not lose yourself to them, but find yourself within them, you start to become more aware that we are multidimensional beings, able to transcend many different realities in one if we will but shift our conscious awareness of them. And so in unifying with the oneness, I share the fact that every time I unify with the oneness, I don't have all of the regrets that as a human, we've got to make life choices and learn to live with them and, all of those great things. And so I asked Chi, my master guide, I'm like, Chi, what's going on with it? Why is it when I unify with the oneness, I don't have all of the regrets of choices and living with them and all that kind of stuff? And he's like, well, Jamie, on a quantum level, all experiences are happening now. All potential outcomes are happening now. Your soul print of consciousness is connected to each and every alternate reality and potential outcome, or it wouldn't be there. So when you are unifying and you just allow yourself to be, you have encompassed all of those different realities as we perceive it into one experience of awareness. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense because, we all have our choices and we got to learn to live with them. But for me to feel so free and my soul was so full, it was interesting because I've had that for many years, but I didn't quite understand why I didn't have those regrets when I unify with the oneness. Just from my awareness, it can be very freeing when we're not so distracted with a lot of the physical life experiences that maybe are going on or that we've had before. It allows you to just be you. And in the moment, once we get that and realizing there is no time, it's all happening right now, then you can realize as that soul print of consciousness, you're connected to everything. Where do you possibly choose to want to connect with next? What other lifetime would you like to be in? There are times when apparently we can choose our next lifetime. And what I mean by that is I share the fact that there was a client who was fairly abundant, and she was giving her daughter, in this case, millions of dollars. And asked the fact that, and you're doing that because? And she's like, oh, I'm investing in my next life. I'm going to be my daughter's daughter. And I'm like, oh, well, that's beautiful. Great. And her daughter wasn't pregnant at the time and during the reading. And then a number of months later, the client that I was reading for graduated, died as we perceive it. And a while later, her daughter was pregnant and then had a child. And it was a girl. What a coincidence. There is no coincidence. I was like, oh my God, you can literally invest in your next life because now as the child for her daughter, the daughter's already abundant because as the child's grandma, in this case, from the other side, was giving the money to her daughter, it was only investing so that when she came back in this life as a baby, there was comfort. So I thought it was pretty cool that in this case, this person's conscious awareness was that she was coming back. It wasn't like, I might come back. It's like, no, I'm investing because I am coming back. She was very certain. There was no guesswork. So I just found that fascinating because she was already aware that there was the potential that you could come back if you chose to. Now, again, it is all about free will. You're not made to do anything, but you're allowed to do everything. So while we're here, if we can give ourselves the gift of living, not just surviving and existing. It can help us to ease into our next lifetime, our graduation, to experience even more, express even more, and accept and attain even more of who we are as a soulprint of consciousness. While we're here, give yourself the gift of living, because when we graduate to the other side, it will be just as solid and just as powerful, and a lot of times it feels a lot more loving and fulfilling because we allow ourselves to just be.
So thank you for joining us today at Psychic Evolution, and keep your connections with your loved ones and be open to the other side and the way it presents itself, or whoever.
Truly, it's all about the love. Have fun.